My name is Nikhil Mehta. With me is Russell Street Report's Tanner George. And we're bringing, I think, a novel concept to you today in this podcast. We're going to do a mock draft duel. So basically, the idea is we're going to use one of the online draft simulators, in this case, the one from Pro Football Focus. Thank you, Pro Football Focus. And we are going to go through the Ravens' 11 picks. And at each pick, both of us are going to make a selection and build our own 11-person draft class. And then at the end, we'll compare and we'll put out an article detailing our picks and see what people think. I think it's really interesting to think about the draft not just as picking individual players at each pick, but trying to build a full draft class to address your short and, more important, your long-term needs. Tanner, what do you think about the Ravens having 11 picks this year? How do you think they're going to build out this draft class?
First of all, thanks for having me on. I think this is a really pivotal draft for the Ravens. As you mentioned, we're butting up against the salary cap each and every year. And as we get further into our contention window, this is a really, really important draft for the Ravens. And having 11 picks is a huge boost. I could see the Ravens trading a few of them, but also just staying where they are because they have a lot of roles in terms of depth that they need to fill. I definitely think Eric DeCosta will go more defense on the defensive side of the ball in this draft based on how the moves were made in free agency. But this is definitely a pivotal class for the Ravens.
Yep, Ravens have 11 picks. We are going to alternate which one of us gets to pick first at each pick. So I will be picking first for the Ravens' first round pick. Um, Tana will be picking first for their second and third round picks. From there, I'll go the fourth, and we will alternate from then on. This was just to make it a little bit more fair. And I think if you're not quite sure what we're doing, you'll understand as soon as we start the process. So I'm going to go ahead and get the mock draft simulator set up over here. We are going to do a full 7 round mock today. May adjust the speed as we go on. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so you guys can see exactly what we're looking at. It's a PFF mock draft simulator. Thank you again, PFF. So Tanner, let's get
Yeah,
started. We got a full
yeah.
7 round mock today. Um, so in the first round, you mentioned defense as the focus for this draft. Do you expect the Ravens to go defense with the 27th overall pick?
I do. I fully expect them to go defense at 27 unless there's a really, really great player on the offensive side of the ball that just drops to them. But I really do expect defense will be the pick here, and that's where I'm leaning for my first pick as well.
Are there any offensive players in mind that you could see dropping or that you really hope drop to the Ravens?
I don't know if I could see it happening, but I've heard some buzz of McMillan potentially dropping to the Ravens. I don't know how likely that is, but yeah, that's one player that we've heard recently whose draft stock is sort of plummeting and could fall into the Ravens' lap.
Yeah, the one, and he's popped up right here is Luther Burden, who, coming into this season was viewed as wide receiver one, the last college football season, and
Mm.
just didn't produce in quite the same way. I think part of that has to do with Missouri's offense and his quarterback situation. But looking at this first pick here, Malachi Starks, available at the 27th pick. There are a number of players. And Tanner, anytime you want to see any other positions or have me scroll to see what
Yeah.
else is available, just let me know.
Mhm.
But with my first pick, this is pretty easier for me. I like Starks. I think Starks is such a phenomenal defender, but most importantly, he fits perfectly in what the Ravens want to do defensively as a third safety, who just has excellent coverage instincts and ball tracking skills. It would enable Kyle Hamilton to be in that weapon star role, playing in the slot down in the box that he really excels in. But he and Malachi Starks would also be able to create a no-fly zone in the deep areas of the field. So I think my pick is going to be Malachi Starks, and I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, Starks, that's a fantastic pick. I was actually hoping to go safety as well. If you could navigate over to safety just to see who's there. Um, yeah, I'm gonna go Nick Emenwari here. It's PFF has him rated a little lower, but he is by far probably my favorite prospect in the entire class. He's a physical freak. I mean, he can do everything. He's huge. He hits really hard, has fantastic ball skills, and I think pairing him with Kyle Hamilton, back deep would be really, really dangerous. And as you said, another safety would free up Kyle Hamilton a little more to do what he does best. So I'm definitely going to go with Emin Worry here.
Really like that pick. Another couple guys are available who I just want to highlight since we're not going to get the chance to talk about him.
Mm.
Nick Scorton, Derek Harmon, James Pierce Jr. These are all guys who I thought about. Always thinking about building a really strong defensive line. But I just think the talent of Starks and Amanda Warriors as such an athlete as well are great picks. So I'm going to go ahead and keep my picks in the PFF simulator, and I will keep track of Tanner's picks as well on a piece of paper. So I'll go ahead and take Starks. So we both took safeties, which is interesting for this exercise because we're both going to be looking at defensive line and edge with our next couple of picks. What do you think about the offensive line class? And do you think the Ravens are really going to invest a round one or day two pick in it? Or do you think they feel comfortable with Falele and Voorhees at guard next year?
I think that the Ravens would probably invest like a third round pick into the offensive line. Going through a couple of mock drafts myself, there are some guys who fall to the Ravens' third round pick at 91 that I think meet what they're looking for, big physical guys. Some of them were tackles in college, but project better as guards in the NFL. So I think that day two pick is probably likely to address the offensive line.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be the sweet spot too. I think they found that, with Roger Rosengarten last year, really good example of finding a guy who was kind of undervalued by the league as a whole. And still, honestly, I think we may look back in a few years and think, hey, that guy should have gone in the back end of the first round because he just had a high floor as a starting right tackle. Tanner, you're up first for our second round pick, at number 59 here. Let me know what you want to scroll over. Some interesting names here. Quinshawn Judkins, Darian Porter, Shamar Turner, who is going to get confused with Shamar Stewart throughout this draft class, I think. Ariante Ursay, Benjamin Morrison, who's fallen throughout the season, but I still really liked his cover instincts at Notre Dame. Any positions you want to check on?
I think that's good right there. I like Morrison. I really like Darian Porter, but to me, the value of Turner is too difficult to turn up. Over from Texas A&M, it's the Ravens. They lost a big guy in Michael Pierce. Turner is 6'4", 300 pounds. I feel like the Ravens do a great job of developing along the defensive line, and I think he could be the next one, day two pick that they develop into a real star in the NFL. So I'm going to go with Shamar Turner from Texas A&M.
All right, so we got Shamar Turner for Texas A&M. That takes him off of my board. It makes it a little tough because I was thinking about taking him. Um, I've gone back and forth here on a number of guys. I think ultimately I am gonna go with Marcus Mbow. I think that I think he could hang a tackle in the NFL. I think that you could develop him as a tackle, but he could push for a starting job right away as a guard. And to me, that's exactly what this team should be looking for. I think guys like Trapilo and Ursay, to me, strike me as more pure tackles. But I think Bo has the versatility, and we've seen how important that versatility is with guys like Patrick McCary over the last couple of years. So I'm going to go ahead and take Marcus and Bo, and we'll move on to the third round. So I have a tackle and a safety. You have a defensive lineman and a you have a defensive lineman and safety. What are you thinking now with your third round pick?
I would like to take an edge rusher. I would have liked to take an edge rusher in the second round,
Me too.
but no one was really there that was intriguing me. Third round, if someone pops up that catches my eye, I think I'm going to go edge. But I think offensive line is also very likely where I'll be going in a couple minutes here.
All right, so let's see. We've got the third round pick, 91 overall. I'm going to go ahead since you mentioned the offensive line and just select those guys for you to look at. Here are the guys who are at the top of the offensive line board right now. Let me know what other positions you want to look at. Wyatt Millam's an intriguing guy, another guy who I think could have some multi-position versatility.
Mhm.
Where else you want me to look?
So actually, I was thinking of going with Millam. That was my gut reaction. I had done a couple of mocks earlier, and I really liked the value there. Tate Ratledge is intriguing, but I do like the versatility that Millam brings. He has shorter arms, so he projects more as a guard in the NFL. But he's just a massive human being, difficult to move, and I feel like the Ravens need more of those. So I'm going to go with Wyatt Millam here.
All right, we'll put you down for Wyatt Millam. I'm going to take a look here and see. This is the tricky thing about this draft. Like, I love Starks, and him being available as 27 is clear, but there are actually a number of cover safeties I like in this draft, including Andrew Makuba from Texas.
Mhm.
He's a guy I definitely would be targeting on day two or three if he did not, if Starks did not fall to the Ravens here. And this is a tough pick. This isn't a pick I love. Riley Leonard is a guy who I thought about as a potential backup until the Ravens went ahead and signed Cooper Rush. And so that's kind of less of a need than them. And I think I'm just going to go with what is ultimately my gut here and go with the player that I think is the best edge available. That's K'Mon Rucker out of North Carolina. He doesn't have quite the pedigree of some of the other day two edge rushers in this class. I think like Jack Sawyer was taken not long before this pick, and he's a really big name out of Ohio State. But Rucker, you know, smaller but big, smaller but good weight. He fits what the Ravens look for at an outside linebacker. Doesn't have a ton of length. From his compare, it doesn't have a ton of height, but he has a good amount of length. And so I think that the Ravens need to continue to invest in athletic edge rushers, and Rucker fits that bill. So I'm going to go ahead and take him, and we'll move on to the fourth round pick here.
I like that pick from you. That I'm sort of concerned with my own class. I like each of the players gotten individually, but n no one's been there at edge that I thought the value was right. So for kicking myself for passing up a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's something that you see across sports is you have your own valuations of players and where they belong, but you also are in a competitive market. And this like the Orioles starting pitching is the easy example where they don't want to pay for starting pitching, but their value models are never going to meet what the real market value is. And the same thing in
Yeah.
the draft, where sometimes if there's a guy you like, you got to go and get him.
Mhm.
Fourth round pick. I have the first pick this time. And this is an interesting one. I do like JJ Pegas. I don't know how to pronounce his name, and we're going to get better at that as the draft season goes on. But I think I'm going to have to go with someone who is slowly becoming one of my guys in the draft, who I think is getting overlooked, is Torrey Horton. Fourth rounder on a wide receiver, right after sign D Hop may not sound like the smartest move, but the Ravens think in long term when it comes to the draft. And I think Horton is a just an all around excellent receiver, who I think if he had a better quarterback this season, he'd be getting drafted on day two. So I'm going to put down Torrey Horton for myself here at pick 129. Tanner, what are you thinking?
Could you go for the edge quickly for me?
Hmm.
Thank you. Just want to see who's there. Um, and no one that I'm liking. It's tough. I don't know. It depends
This
on
is
what
the
the
one tricky
Ravens.
thing with the simulators is sometimes where you want a guy doesn't always match up with where they're going to be available.
Yeah. Let me see
Sorry.
here.
I think Horton had a really, really stellar 2023
Mhm.
season. Um, and then just the Colorado State team, just overall, I felt like didn't look the same this year. But he's a guy who I've had my eye on for a while, kind of like how I had my eye on Ricky Pearsall last year, because when I was watching Anthony Richardson film originally, I was like, who is this guy that's catching all of these inaccurate passes? And it was Ricky Pearsall. Horton, part of this, I was born in Colorado, so I follow Colorado State a little bit closely. But I just think he's a fantastic receiver, kind of an all-around guy who can fit in as a three in a lot of different ways.
So I think with my pick here, I'm going to go with Stavian Jones. He's huge. He's 6'6", 280. I really like that size. He could obviously use some development, seeing that he fell this far. But the Ravens need an edge, or at least, someone that they can rotate in and out. He's not going to be a star, obviously, on day one. So I'm going to go with Jones here.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put Fort Horton down for myself, give you Savion Jones. And from here on out, we'll just be straight alternating picks. Who gets to select first? So, Tanner, you're up first. And again, let me know where you want to look. Riley Leonard, again, I think before you go to your pick, actually, I'm curious what
Mhm.
you think about Riley Leonard. To me, he was a guy who I would use a fourth round pick on if the Ravens didn't sign Cooper Rush and look at
Mhm.
Leonard as a potential long-term backup, especially with that rushing ability.
See, I agree with you on that one. The Cooper Rush thing sort of threw the Cooper Rush signing, especially that it was 2 years, threw a little bit of a wrench into things. The Ravens tried to draft a developmental backup in Devin Leary last year. Obviously, we haven't seen many fruits come from that yet. I do like Leonard, but I'm not sure if he's who I want to use my fifth round pick on,
Yeah, I don't think I would use. I don't know about using a
or fourth
fourth or
round. Yeah.
fifth rounder on him now, and he's probably going to be gone by then. I think that's what kind of Rush did is, you have that immediate problem solved, but you got to keep taking shots for the long-term backup. What positions are you looking at for this pick?
I was actually hoping to go to wide receiver.
All right, wide receiver, some Pat Bryant,
Yeah.
Kobe Hudson, Kyle Williams, Nick Nash had a huge year at San Jose
Mhm.
State. Ty Felton, the Maryland product. Number of players further down. Ricky
Yeah.
White's a name that I feel like has come up in Ravens draft circles, but isn't getting a lot of national love.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. But I sort of my gut wants me to take Ty Felton, being that we're from Maryland. But Pat Bryant, he's a really talented wide receiver. And I think I'm going to go with him here.
All right.
He's very talented coming out of Illinois. The Ravens do need a long-term number three option after Hopkins. After Hopkins, eventually leaves. They do have Tez Bryant, but giving him some competition is never a bad thing. And I think the value for Bryant is right here.
All right. Pat Bryant it is. I'm going to go back to the overall board and take a look at a couple different positions here. Running back is something I weirdly think about in such a strong draft class. I think about using a day three pick, but I don't think I'd use one of the compensatory fourth rounders. Tight end, they're it's hard to see a fourth tight end making this roster with Patrick Ricard re-signed. And so again, it kind of narrows it in a way. It narrows down what the Ravens might be willing to do in the draft. Looking a bit further down here, really not a ton of names that jump out to me. I'm going to go check the offensive line because I think that is an area that's ripe for a double dip. Um, and again, I think I'm going to go a little bit against the consensus here, and go with a guy who I really like, Emory Jones Jr. Um, he is someone who, whenever I was watching Will Campbell film, he always jumped out to me. Um, I think he projects best as a guard, but again, he has that tackle versatility where he can step in if necessary. He's not a guy who I'd want to come in and develop as a future tackle, partially because he's a right tackle only kind of guy, and Rosengarten seems to have that locked down, although who knows what could happen in 5 years he switches.
Mhm.
But what I like about Jones is I think he could be a bluff starter at guard. And again, I think taking two shots at offensive line here, they lost McCary, then they lost Josh Jones, and so they need some of that versatility back on their line. So I'm going to go ahead and go a little bit against the consensus and take Emory Jones at the end of the fourth round here.
I like that pick, especially with Ben Cleveland is only back on a 1 year deal.
Yeah,
So,
and there's I don't know if there's any guaranteed money attached. It's a very low risk deal if they don't want to keep him. He's really going to have to earn his spot. I was a little surprised at that
yeah,
re-signing, given all of the, I don't know, gestures broadly at the Ben Cleveland and Baltimore experience, you know.
yeah, I was shocked.
Um,
It didn't seem like Harbaugh loved him, and then he got into some trouble off the field. So it was kind of surprising that the Ravens re-signed him at all. But seeing it was that low risk, prove it deal, prove you can make it out in camp.
yeah,
I
it's a
guess
good
it
deal
does make
for
some sort of sense.
yeah, it's a good deal for a guy who, in my opinion, has stepped up every time he's needed to. So 176, I believe this is my first pick this time, and that works out really well for me. I think I'm gonna take a look and see what's there. Ty Felton, who you mentioned, is getting a little close to the top of the board here. Um, Danny Stutzman, who I think has a lot of fans as like a Malik Harrison replacement. Um, I could see him playing that role. But to me, this is pretty easy. I'm gonna take a shot on a cornerback on day three here with Denzel Burke. Um,
Mhm.
sorry, I gotta write this down. And Denzel Burke, just a very experienced outside cornerback. I think there are pluses and minuses to how much he's played at Ohio State. He has a ton of
Mhm.
experience, but I also think it's very clear what you're going to get out of him. And I think there is a fairly firm ceiling on his ability to contribute. He's a good athlete. He's not an elite athlete. He's a day three prospect for a reason, right? But as a
Yeah.
day three prospect, I will take a guy who's played, I'm not sure exactly how many, but let's check. Who's played almost 2,000 snaps total, because I think he played as a freshman as well, in the Big Ten. I'll take that
Mhm.
experience. I know that there are some concerns that when a guy's played that much and hasn't improved a ton, there's concern about what you can get out of him. But I think in
Mhm.
a fifth round compensatory pick, getting a guy who could be a backup cornerback as a rookie is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good pick. Could you navigate over to see
Oh
what the
yeah,
linebackers are looking like?
absolutely. Yeah, linebacker is
Thank
an
you.
interesting one. I feel like it's a sneaky strong linebacker draft class. Jack Kaiser from Notre Dame is a name I had my eye on. I didn't want to take him
Hmm.
earlier, but he's a name that I've thought about for the Ravens as a third down pass defender.
Yeah. Okay. Could you go over to corners as well, please?
Hmm.
Thank you. Um, and then back to the overall board, if you could.
Hmm.
Let's see. Mm. See, I really do want. I'm worried about the linebacker depth that the Ravens have because they lost Chris Board. They signed Jake Hummel, so that's sort of a fair one for one there. But Malik Harrison is gone now. You have Trenton Simpson. A lot of people expected him to be able to just replicate what Patrick Queen did last year. That wasn't really the case. Simpson's playing time decreased as the year went on in favor of Board. So linebacker is sort of a concern to me. And I think I'm going to go with Cody Simon here. He had 7 sacks last season. He's played a lot of snaps in the Big Ten, which obviously said is important. Um, so I think I'm gonna go with Simon here because I like the experience. I like the numbers he's put up. He's a little small, being only 6'2", 235, but as a number three linebacker or even number four for this year, I like him.
All right, so I'm gonna go with we both go with Ohio State players. We both go with guys who have played a lot of snaps, and again, similar reasons. Burke, I believe has the Burke has is a little smaller. I think he has enough size to play special. Excuse me, to play special teams. Simon definitely would be a
Mhm.
good special teams contributor. So I'm gonna go ahead and add Burke to my class just to keep things consistent in the simulator. But I will have you down as taking Cody Simon, and we move on to pick 183.
183. See,
And
I'm just sort of gonna copycat here. You double dipped on tackle, and I'm thinking that's what I'm gonna go with as well. Um, Not 100% sure. I have to check on it. Yeah, I really like Logan Brown. He's got good arm size. He's a big guy, 6'6", 311, 10-inch hands. I think I'm gonna go with Logan Brown here because the Ravens do need some depth for the future at tackle. So that's who I'm gonna take.
all right, you're gonna take Logan Brown. Sorry, I just gotta update my list
Mhm.
here. Logan Brown. Yeah, and so this is one where I want to take go back and take a look at my class here. I got a safety tackle, edge, wide receiver, double dipped at tackle, and added another developmental cornerback. So I feel like I can almost go anywhere I want with this pick, but really the main thing I'm thinking about at this point is you got to build the defensive line, you got to build the trenches. Now, there's nothing here I honestly particularly love. Tim Smith is a experienced player, but he's kind of a pure run stopper. Ty Felton, who we've talked about, but I'm not sure that a double dip at um, wide receiver is quite what I'd be looking for. So I think I'm actually going to go and do what I was talking about earlier, which is use one of these picks on a running back. But I'm pretty torn because, I think James Brooks and Gordon is obviously the big body back. Looked really good in 23 and not so good in 24. Um, Jordan James, I think, presents to me as a bit more of a versatile guy. Um, I think that he'll be able to. I think that he to me factors in as more of like a RB3 4 in a rotational way. I'm kind of torn between the two. And I think part of me just really loves Gordon's size. And I think that he could also, being in the backfield from Derrick Henry, another big runner, he could benefit and kind of learn how to use his size in the best way. So I think I am going to go ahead and put Ollie Gordon down as my sixth round pick here, which is surprising to say considering his, again, kind of like Luther Burden, considering his status coming into the 2024 season. Surprising to see him fall, all the way to day three here, but I will add him to my class and we'll keep moving on. This is obviously where it gets pretty cramped for the Ravens, right? They have
Yeah.
203, 210, 212, and then 243 all the way at the end of the draft. And, at this point in my armchair general manager, in my general manager armchair, I should say, to me, it's like, okay, this is a crapshoot. What traits do we want to bet on? Do we want to bet on experience? Do we want to bet on athleticism? Are there positions we want to look at? Um, so you have the first pick this time around. Just I'm going to scroll through kind of these first few guys, and you can let me know where else you want to look.
hmm Could you go over to running back as well? There was
Hmm.
one or two running backs
Ah,
who I liked um that could be available down here.
I like Taj Brooks. I also know Donovan Edwards is just a
hmm
Michigan guy. Maybe that's just a Baltimore bias towards a Michigan guy, but he's someone I'd look at it maybe in round
hmm
7.
Could you scroll down a little more for me?
This is these, yeah, these are all my
That's the end.
names.
Okay, yeah, so he's gone. If you could head back to the overall board, I did notice that Ricky White was there, and it feels irresponsible to double dip at receiver. So I'm gonna think on it. Ricky White is obviously someone that's really talented, and as you mentioned, has been mentioned in Ravens draft circles. But I would like to take another look at the overall board just to see who's there.
Yeah, I'm just gonna scroll down slowly so you can see
Yeah.
any names that jump out. Miles Frazier, maybe I'm just a big fan of that LSU line. I like Miles Frazier too, Ricky White, Teddy Buchanan, um, Keaton
I think
Crawford.
I think what I'm actually thinking about is Brady Cook sort of jumps out to me. I know he's the top guy on the board. The Ravens, like you said, I would like to get a developmental quarterback in here. Brady Cook's a guy who has showed some flashes of impressiveness at Mizzou. Maybe the Ravens think that they could try like the Devin Leary experiment all over again. Just take a shot at him. He has a good arm. He's been around a while. So I think I'm going to go with Cook here.
Yeah, I wrote in an article recently that the Ravens should continue to take shots like they did with Leary last year. Leary had a really nice throwing session at the combine, then impressed a lot of scouts.
Mhm,
And I think the Ravens were like, look, this guy has a live arm. Let's
mhm,
get him in. Let's see how we can develop him and see where it goes. And I think they do the same thing with Cook. I think that that's something that you should continue to do because they're kind of it's a 6th round pick. It's not a crazy
mhm.
investment, right?
Yeah.
The upside is you have a long-term backup and you could even, if a guy really develops in your system, you could even flip him for a pick in the future. And so I
Mhm,
think that's a good, smart investment there. Um, I am debating going with Ricky White here because I think that he will contribute on special teams, and I'm not so sure that Horton will be able to be a plus special teams guy. So I'm kind of debating between him, Teddy Buchanan, a couple other names that I like here. Let me take a quick look at my draft class. I've already got one receiver. We do have 210 coming up. Um, Gosh, I think I am going to double dip at receiver, even though I agree. I know you said it was irresponsible, but I think Ricky White is a guy who I just think they. If I remember correctly, he played a ton of special teams at UNLV, and I think that that's a clear trait that the
mhm.
Ravens would want to bring in. So I'm going to go ahead and add Ricky White to my draft class. We're going to go to the 210th pick. That's going to be your selection first.
So that's good. Brady Cook. I think it would be your selection. I took
Oh,
Cook
correct.
first.
Sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I'll be first.
Yep.
Thank you. Um,
Mhm,
and Yeah, and see, this is the thing, right? The guy who I was deciding between, I was kind of expecting to be there at the next pick. So I would think I'm going to take Teddy Buchanan um, for the same reasons that you said earlier about, needing linebacker depth, whether that's to push Trenton Simpson, which I don't think Buchanan would do as a rookie, but I certainly think he could contribute on special teams.
mhm. Yeah, the guy who I'm gonna go with here is Taj Brooks, um, for out of Texas Tech. Very consistent between 2023 and 2024. Both times about 1,500 yards, 5.3 yards a carry. Had 17 touchdowns last year. He is smaller at 5'10", but Rasheen Ali, I don't know how much the Ravens really saw out of him last year. He didn't when the Ravens
Hmm.
were looking thin at running back. He never was really able to step up and play much of a role, which sort of concerns me long term. So I'd take a shot at Brooks here.
Yeah, and they haven't really made any moves at the position this offseason. I think it's clear
Mm,
they're looking at this class as a way to augment. Because again, Ali was a fifth or sixth round pick. It's not a huge investment to give up on after a year if
Mhm.
you're just like, hey, he's not it.
Yeah.
So I like this. Another big back to bring. Another big back to bring. I'm gonna go ahead and slot in Teddy as my pick. And then 212, you are picking first, Tanner.
I don't. This is where I'm tempted to double dip at safety, even though the Ravens do have some depth. I don't really. I'd actually like to look at corner because I have not
Okay.
taken a corner yet, which bothers me. Um. Uh.
Jabbar Muhammad, another name I feel like that has fallen over the course of the year. And I haven't really been able to pinpoint why. I know he's just not an elite athlete, but he's a guy who I would think about late on day three. I'm not quite as familiar with the other prospects.
Yeah,
Where else would you like to look?
I'm not super familiar with any of these guys. If you could go back to the overall board. Um.
It's kind of like do
Yeah.
you draft a tight end and hope you can sneak in through waivers? I mean, there are so many variables, and with 11 draft picks, when
Mhm.
it's tough to guarantee they're all going to make the roster. So where do you want to spend the picks on?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with the corner from Florida. If you could scroll up a little more.
Yeah, I'll go over the corners
Yeah.
here. Jason
Yeah,
Marshall
Jason Marshall
Jr.
Jr. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he had some good games last year, and it's a really, really late round pick. Yeah, Eric Costa always says, you can never have enough corners. I like that he played with Florida and the SEC, has that experience. So I'm gonna go with Marshall there.
All right, so you're gonna take Marshall. I'm gonna take someone who's quietly become a big sleeper of mine, Malachi Moore.
Mhm.
Um, The trouble with taking Malachi Moore on day three is that he just doesn't profile as a plus special teams contributor in the way that he comes downhill and tackles when he's playing defense. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know how much special teams he played. I don't know how much special teams he played at Alabama, but he just doesn't have the size of a guy like even Starks, certainly not Kyle Hamilton. And the Ravens spent two picks or spent a one pick last year on Sanusi Kane as a downhill special team safety, and they kept Bo Brady on the 53-man roster in a similar role.
Mhm.
So I think if the Ravens are going to double dip at safety this year, it should be looking for these center fielder guys. My this is not a college comp of like Geno Stone and Malachi Moore played similarly in college, but I think Malachi Moore could grow into something similar to Geno
Mhm.
Stone in the pros. And I think that I think that in terms of what the Ravens skill set is and what they're looking for in safety and what was missing last year was a guy who can play deep and play center field. And Moore has a ton of experience with that. Again, he's not a weapon and I wouldn't put him down in the slot. I wouldn't have him playing a lot of man coverage in general. But I think as a backup center fielder, he's a really good option.
I agree.
So
That's a good pick.
yeah, so I'm gonna go slot that one in. And we're gonna head down to 243. While this is simulating, I'm gonna go through my class real quick, and then Tanner, I'm gonna have you go through yours. So I took Malachi Starks with the first pick. It's pretty easy for me. I think Starks is such a clear first rounder, who really fits well in what the Ravens need at safety. Like I was saying, his ability to play center field. He's versatile enough that the Ravens can move him around as they need, but he really, really, I think, would be a nice long-term partner for Kyle Hamilton. Marcus and Bo, who is actually, in a way, a little bit strikes me some a little bit to Roger Rosengarten. Needs to work on the anchor and his strength as a blocker, but is really fast, a good zone blocker. Kamon Rucker. Part of this was just looking at the edge remaining that I like the most because I think it's really day one and day two edges that really find success in the league. The day three edges that find success in the league tend to be pretty rare.
Mhm.
Torrey Horton, Emory Jones are two of kind of my guys in this draft class who I have followed for the last couple of years. And so I think sometimes we get a little bit caught in looking at the most recent year of film as opposed to looking a couple years of film. Certainly teams look at a couple years of film, but in the draft kind of online community, I think we have a tendency to look at the most recent. And Jones and Horton both didn't have as great of years in 2024 as they did in 23, but I think that's why they're available here on day three and
Mhm.
why I would take them. Denzel Burke, a similar guy who I just think has shown what his ceiling is as a cornerback, But I think he's also shown what his floor is, and that's a competent outside cornerback in the Big Ten for the last 4 years. As a backup rotational guy, that's not bad. I do worry about his ability to contribute on special teams. Ollie Gordon, just take a big back and put him behind Derrick Henry and see what he can learn. Again, I think you said it earlier, these are 6 round picks. These are lottery tickets. And so I think I'm looking for a combination of like what's going to fit the best, what's going to develop the best in Baltimore. Ricky White, double dipping at receiver, which, like you said, is a little tricky given the state of the roster, the fact that they currently have 5 guys that seem set for a roster spot next year, which means spending 2 picks on a receiver seems like one of them won't make the roster. Which I think is a little risky, but again, Ricky White is just a special teams demon. I think that's worth spending a 6 round pick on. Teddy Buchanan, needing linebacker depth. Not a super, again, not a guy who I expect to come in and push Trenton Simpson, but I think he can contribute on special teams. And Malachi Moore, who, as I said, I love as a center field free safety. You want to take us through your class real quick?
Yeah, sure. So my first pick is Nick Emenwari. He was the guy who I have circled coming into the draft as the guy I wanted to get. He is overall my favorite prospect in this class for the Ravens, just because of his size. He's like a physical freak, as I said before. He's a fantastic ball skills, really hard hitter. I think I mean, the ceiling is like he has almost no ceiling in the NFL. He can be as great as he wants to be, just given his physical tools. I didn't in second round. I went with Shamar Turner. I would have ideally liked to have gone with edge rusher in the second round, but no one really there who I loved. So I took Turner, noting that the Ravens lost Michael Pierce in this offseason, which is literally a pretty big hole to fill on that defensive line. So it went with Turner there. Wyatt Millum is a guy who I like the value of, especially at pick 91 in the third round. Again, a little, I sort of have to trade up, going with edge earlier in the draft to get these guys, but I think Millum could be a solid guard or like a Patrick McCary type in the NFL. Davian Jones, betting on his physical nature here, he's huge. I think he was 6'6". Um, just betting on his ability to contribute with his size in an edge rusher role. Pat Bryant is a guy who, a lot of people are really excited about at wide receiver. He had a good year on a great Illinois team in 2024, and I think that down the road he could very well fill that WR3 role that the Ravens will be searching for once DeAndre Hopkins departs. Cody Simon at linebacker. The linebacker is an underrated need for the Ravens this offseason. They haven't really done a whole lot to address it. Roquan Smith, he had a little bit of a down year by his standards last season. Trenton Simpson wasn't able to step up to be the guy a lot of people thought he would be. And I think that's the reason that the Ravens defense struggled a lot, especially in the early going last season, was that poor linebacker play. Logan Brown is another big guy at offensive tackle who I like. Again, as we get into the later rounds, I'm a big fan of just betting on athletic nature here, just to see, if someone can turn out. Brady Cook at quarterback, I feel like he's a solid bet to be a good number 2 quarterback behind Lamar Jackson in future years. But if not, it's a late round pick. It's the same thing with Devin Leary. Maybe he's a guy that sticks around on the practice squad and then the Ravens go at it again next year. Taj Brooks at running back. Rasheen Ali, I mentioned, he didn't really impress when he was given the limited opportunities that he had last year. So I think that the Ravens, I don't know how high the Ravens are on him at this point. So I'm going to go with Brooks there. And then Jason Marshall at corner. EDC says you can never have enough cornerbacks. So Marshall was my pick there.
All right, and you have the first pick in our last selection of this mock draft duel here. Let me know where you want me to scroll.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go with Dante Schrader out of Maryland here at safety. I go to Maryland, so I was at all the home games this year, and I was able to watch him in person. And he was pretty impressive. There are obviously a lot of flaws in his game, which is why he's available in the seventh round. Um, but he's a physical hitter. He can make good reads on the ball. He stuck with Maryland even through some trying times last year. He actually is a two-sport athlete. It just speaks to his athleticism, and I don't really mind taking a shot on him, um, just to see what happens. You see if he can contribute to that safety room. You have Kane, you have Bo Braid also out of Maryland. Our Darius Washington is coming back, but you have a lot of competition to see who can get that last safety role, and I think Schrader has a good shot of being able to pull that off.
And I realized as you were describing your class that there's a very clear and gaping issue with my class, and it's the lack of defensive interior linemen. I am going to take Ty Robinson with my last pick here. I think part of it was I honestly just forgot about it. I think with a
Mhm.
mock draft, sometimes you can just get zoned in on, specific guys that you're looking for. And when I was in college, I had a big wall length whiteboard that I had prospects ranked and tiered on. And that was, having something like that, like teams have, is a lot easier to keep track of every different position and
Yeah.
try to hit. So fully acknowledge that I should have addressed defensive line before this. None of the picks quite lined up where I wanted to, but like I said, with Rucker, Emory Jones, you got to go get your guys, and I didn't do
Mhm.
that. So I'm going to take Ty Robinson. I do quite like him. I do think he's a little bit underrated. He has the size to play, I think, a number of spots along the interior. Importantly, he has a pretty decent pass rushing profile for a day three pick. And I think if I'm looking for a day three pick, I either want a guy who I think is going to be an absolute brick wall in the middle, or I want a guy who I think I can develop as a pass rusher. I think Robinson falls into the latter. I'm going to make him my seventh round pick. PFF is going to sim out these last picks. We're going to see what my grade is just for fun. Um, I'm sure it would be possible to do another mock draft and get your exact set of picks and see what PFF grades it as. And maybe we'll do that when we put this out publicly.
Mhm.
Um, let's see what PFF thought. They did not like me taking Marcus and Bo or Emory Jones Jr. or Ollie Gordon. Overall, gave me a B.
Mhm.
Obviously, they really like Malachi Starks, was their ninth overall prospect,
Oh
falling
yeah.
to 27, which is, of course, the limitation with these mock drafts sometimes is they're based on one site's rankings and how they're evaluated. So I'm gonna take down the mock draft here. Tanner, thanks so much for joining me. I thought this really went well for our first time doing this.
Yeah.
Were there any specific takeaways that you had?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I think that was a lot of fun. I think the specific takeaway I have is, we did this mock draft and talked about it, and I've done other mock draft is that it could be very tempting to let edge rusher get away for the Ravens as a priority because there are a lot of guys where it's like, I would like to take an edge rusher in this spot, but I have my guy here that I really want to go and get. And so I think staying disciplined in that for the Ravens, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out what they do. If they try to target edge rusher within their first three picks, or if they're like, you know what, let's slide to the fourth round and see what happens with it from there. Um, but yeah, edge rusher is very, very interesting for the Ravens with the picks that they have in this draft.
Yeah, I think edge rusher and I think defensive line. I think there's they don't have any. They don't have any insanely pressing short-term needs. And I say
Mm.
insanely pressing and short-term specifically because I think that you could argue they could stand to upgrade at guard, they could stand to upgrade at maybe defensive tackle, edge rusher, but there's nowhere that we don't have a starter for next year. And that's really what I mean. Uh, and the Ravens try to go in the draft every year in that same position, so they can use the draft as a long-term plan. And so, just looking at like my list, I see obviously round one, you want a guy who's going to play as a rookie, which I think Malachi Starks absolutely would. You day two, you want guys who could maybe contribute as rookies. I think Marcus and Bo could definitely be in play for a guard spot as a rookie, and could develop as a guy who could play tackle later on. Um, I also don't think it's the worst thing to end up with a 4 year starting guard with the 59th overall pick either.
Oh yeah.
Um, Rucker, like I said, that's an edge. He'll be a rotational edge as a rookie. Horton is probably just going to be shoved down the depth chart as a result of the way the Ravens handle their receivers. Burke,
Mm.
Malachi Moore will be backup in this backup and hopefully special teams in the secondary. Same thing with Ricky White if he would be able to make the roster. On day three, they're backups. They're guys that you don't really envision playing a lot as rookies, and you really do see them developing over the long term. Did you have any other final notes on your draft class and kind of how you built it?
Final notes. I would say that, I wish I had addressed edge rusher more. I only took one guy, which is in the fourth round. I think it would be appropriate for the Ravens to double dip at edge rusher. I do see them adding a wide receiver in this draft, but as you noted, he's just going to get shoved down on the depth chart. And it won't be until a couple seasons until we see them because they took Tez Johnson last year, or not Tez Johnson, Devontae Walker, in last year's draft out of North Carolina. And we didn't see a whole lot of him this year. And now with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, we're not going to see a whole lot of him in 2025 either. But yeah, I was happy with how the board shook out for me, with the way that I want the Ravens to address their needs. But this is a very intriguing class, and I think that the Ravens would be right to go defensive heavy here.
All right. Well, Tanner, thanks so much
Yeah,
for joining me. This was a lot of fun. We look
yeah.
forward to bringing more of these mock draft duels to you over the next month. I imagine that general managers in real life do mock drafts. They probably don't log on to PFF. They probably use
Mhm,
their own internal models. But it's something Eric DeCosta has talked about in terms of predicting who's going to be available when.
mhm.
Your models help you do that, but then you also have to strategize building a full 11-person draft class like we did today. So that's why I really
Yeah,
wanted to do this. Thanks so much again for Tanner for joining me, and thanks to PFF for making your wonderful draft simulator.
yeah. Thanks for joining us, guys.
All right, thanks for
Yeah.
listening. Have a good one.
One.